The day she left, she cried on the staircase like she was the one being abandoned. I stood there with a suitcase in one hand and the silence of every unspoken apology in the other. She said her heart was confused, that she needed time, space, maybe love. But the truth is, when someone asks for time, what they really want is a moment to see if someone else fits better. And someone did, faster than I thought, cleaner than I'd expected. It was almost surgical, the way she removed me from her life, her feed, her words. For weeks, I walked through our city like a ghost, tracing our old memories, wondering where I went wrong, wondering if loyalty was ever enough. Until that day, when she walked into the cafe we once called ours, and found me, eyes closed, smiling, my head resting on someone else's lap, someone who looked at me like I was never meant to be questioned. She didn't cry this time, she just stared, and I swear I saw her heart shatter behind that practiced smile. Turns out, her heart wasn't confused, it just needed contrast to understand peace. The sunlight crawled through the curtains like it didn't know we were dying. Golden, slow, almost kind, the kind of morning light that made you believe everything was still warm, still home, still real. She stood by the stove, back to me, humming a song I used to love, but now it just sounded like someone else's memory, familiar but hollow. Her cardigan slipped off one shoulder, hair loosely tied. She looked soft, too soft for what she was about to do to me. The coffee machine hissed. She poured mine first, still knew how I liked it, no sugar, 1 teaspoon of regret, and yet, she didn't look at me, not once. I sat at the edge of the dining table, fingers circling the rim of my mug like I was clinging to the last loop of a dream unraveling. She talked. There's a discount on laundry detergent this week. I think my mom's coming into town. Oh, and I signed us up for the neighbor's baby shower, just for appearances, you know? Appearances. I almost laughed. Here we were, performing an entire play with no audience. There was a framed photo still hanging beside the fridge, us from last autumn. Her eyes looked at me in it. Soft, sure, certain. Now, they avoided mine, like they might drown in them. I reached across the table, quietly, gently. She was setting a plate of toast down. My fingers found hers, just the edge of her knuckles, and she recoiled. Like I had burned her, like my love had become too heavy to hold. I'm just tired, she said. The words barely left her lips, like she was ashamed of how often she used them now. But it wasn't exhaustion from work or life. It was me. I was what made her tired. I nodded. There are certain silences that scream louder than fights. This one wrapped itself around my throat and told me to sit still. She buttered her toast like nothing had happened. I stared at the crumbs falling onto the plate, how even the yaya. He had more direction than we did now. You're not eating? She asked without looking up. I shook my head. I'm not hungry. And that was true, not for food, not for small talk, not for pretending anymore. Outside, the wind stirred leaves into little spirals on the pavement. Autumn was arriving, the season of letting go. I might stay at Mia's for a few days, she murmured, sliding her plate aside, not even finishing it. Her fingers played with the edge of her phone, always with one foot already out the door. For space? I asked. It slipped out. She blinked, as if surprised I was still in the conversation. As friends, she replied too quickly. No, I mean, for space, for your head, for your heart, you know. She paused. Then. I think it's just all too much right now. Work. Expectations. Us. The word didn't land softly, it landed like a mistake. Her voice was calm, but her fingers trembled as she picked at her sleeve. I wanted to reach out again, to fight, to plead, to remind her of the nights we stayed up whispering about forever, but I didn't. Because when you love someone more than yourself, you start loving them even when they stop loving you. You learn how to disappear gracefully, a quiet fade, a final bow. I stood slowly. She didn't look up, just sipped her coffee, still humming that goddamn song. I walked past the photo on the fridge, paused, and turned it face down. Let her notice later, let her wonder why. At the door, I asked, "Do you want me to wait for you to pack, or?" "No," she said. Her voice was soft, but firm. "I'll just send for the rest later." I nodded, then smiled. The kind of smile you give when you're bleeding but don't want to stain the room. The kind of smile you wear to protect the person holding the knife. She didn't come to the door. She didn't say goodbye. Just the clink of her spoon in the mug, like a metronome counting down the last seconds of us. Outside, the sky had turned a washed-out gray. Rain was coming. I stepped into the wind and let it carry the silence off my shoulders. But before I turned the corner, I looked back once, and through the window, I saw her standing alone in the kitchen, mug in hand, eyes finally meeting mine through the glass. Not with love, not with hate, just the look of someone who realized too late that silence is also an answer, and I was done pretending. She said it with the stillness of someone who had already moved on, like she'd practiced every syllable in front of a mirror, smoothing the edges until the words no longer cut her, but they carved into me like glass. It's not you, I don't know what I feel anymore. That's the cruelty of confusion. It sounds soft, gentle, merciful, even. But it's only mercy for them, never for the one left holding the certainty. I stood there, in the doorway of what used to be ours, watching her zip up the last bag. Her favorite scarf hung on the coat rack. She didn't take it. I don't think she even noticed. Rain tapped the windows like it was trying to interrupt, trying to say, "Don't do this," but she didn't hear it, or maybe she did, and didn't care. I asked, "Are you leaving because of me?" My voice cracked like old wood. She paused, turned slightly, not enough to meet my eyes. "I just need space, to grow, to think." I nodded, because what else can you do when someone says they don't know how they feel about you anymore? You become the villain in a story you spent years trying to write gently. She left that night, didn't slam the door, didn't say goodbye. The silence afterward was a scream I couldn't cover with music. I found the letter on her side of the bed, folded once and sealed with nothing. Not even her name, just pale lavender paper and a lipstick stain that felt like mockery. My hands trembled as I opened it. Not from fear, but from knowing. Some part of me already knew it wouldn't be what I needed. "I'm sorry I can't be what you need right now. I need to figure out who I am, outside of us. You deserve someone who's sure of you, not someone constantly questioning everything. No, I love you. No, I'll miss you." Not even a whisper of "I tried," just a polite goodbye dressed up in self-help quotes and personal growth jargon. As if breaking my Rohar's IBS would somehow strengthen her spine. I read it 12 times. 12. Each time hoping that some invisible ink would reveal her regret. That maybe between the lines, I'd find an apology she was too afraid to write. But all I found was distance. The kind of distance that doesn't measure miles. It measures how much less someone sees you than they used to. I sat at the edge of the bed, letter in one hand, the silence in the other. My reflection in the mirror looked like a man who'd misplaced his future. I had been so sure, so goddamn sure. When she forgot to set her alarm, I woke her. When she cried during movies, I wiped her cheeks before she could feel embarrassed. When she said she didn't love herself enough, I loved her twice as hard. But love isn't a currency you can hand someone who's already saving for another life. So I did the only thing I could. I walked to the kitchen, turned on the sink, and lit the corner of the letter with a match. The flame hesitated, like it didn't even want to touch her words. Then it took them. The edges curled first, then the middle, then the ink turned to ash. I watched it burn until there was nothing left but smoke rising into the air like a final message to nowhere. This is how she ended us. Not with screaming, not with betrayal, but with absence, with "I don't know," with almost. The smoke alarm didn't go off, even it had grown tired of warning me. I opened the window and let the wind pull the last pieces of ash away, a slow drift, like her scent leaving my hoodie, like her voice fading from my voicemail, like love forgetting the way back. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a neighbor laughed. Life continued, oblivious to the fact that mine had just folded and disappeared in a plume of smoke. I closed the window, turned off the light, and sat in the dark, listening to the echo of her absence carve itself into the walls. No one warns you that silence has a sound, that it can echo through your chest like a forgotten voicemail, that it can crawl up the walls at night and whisper your name in her voice, then vanish before you can reply. The day after she left, I didn't turn on the music. I let the apartment breathe without sound, let the floor creak and the refrigerator hum and the wind rattle the windows. Even the ticking clock seemed louder. As if time wanted me to know it was still moving, with or without her. I ate cereal out of paper bowls. I told myself it was for convenience, but really, I just couldn't bring myself to wash dishes we once used together. Her lipstick used to stain the rim of every glass. Now the glasses sat in the cupboard, untouched, like relics of a life that stopped mid-sentence. I only slept on the left side of the bed. The right side stayed smooth, untouched. As if she might return one night, curl into the space she once called safe, and pretend she never left. But I knew. She was already writing herself into another story, a story where I was just the prologue. I went days without speaking, not out of protest, just, no one asked anything woesome. Wrath answering. The mail piled up, dust settled like grief on every surface. I found one of her earrings under the couch, a small, silver one she used to wear on Tuesdays. She said she liked symmetry, but I noticed she always wore mismatched pairs, like even her ears were afraid of full commitment. I placed it on the windowsill, let the sunlight kiss it every morning, like maybe light could hold her when I no longer could. One evening, I stepped outside just to feel something other than stale air. It was July, but the wind was sharp, cutting through my sleeves like memory. I stood at the crosswalk near the bookstore, the one we used to duck into when it rained. And that's when I saw her. Across the street. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, strands dancing around her cheekbones. She laughed, tilted her head back the way she used to when I whispered bad jokes in bed. Only this time, it wasn't for me. A man stood beside her, taller, clean-shaven, wearing a grey coat I didn't recognize. She reached for his arm as they crossed the street, and he draped his jacket over her shoulders like it belonged there. She looked warm, safe, held. And I stood on the other side of the road, shivering in a t-shirt I had bought with her. In July. In a season that used to mean watermelon slices and shared playlists. Now it meant watching her walk into a life that didn't include me. I didn't call out, didn't run after her, didn't cause a scene. Because the truth is, some people don't leave you in storms, they leave you under clear skies while you're still packing the umbrella. And when they look happy, you don't want to interrupt their sunshine with your leftover rain. I walked home slower than usual, let my footsteps echo on the sidewalk, each one a question I no longer had answers to. Why didn't she fight for us? Was I really that forgettable? Did love expire, like milk, or apologies? At the corner, a street musician was playing something soft on a violin. It was off-key, but honest. I stood there, hands in my pockets, and let the sound fill the cracks inside me. It wasn't healing, but it was something. That night, I made soup, real soup, not instant. I used the bowl she once called too small for comfort. It was the only one that didn't remind me of shared meals. I sat by the window with the lights off, watching the world blur through glass and steam. The silver earring still sat on the sill, catching the moonlight. I thought about how love doesn't always end in fire or betrayal. Sometimes it just forgets you. And forgetting, I realized, has a flavor too. It tastes like cold soup, eaten in silence, in a room that used to echo with laughter. But as I took the last spoonful, something shifted. A breeze rolled in, lifting the curtain. The silver earring slipped, fell off the sill, and landed in my empty bowl. A tiny sound, like a punctuation mark. And I stared at it, realizing. Maybe this chapter was done, but I wasn't. Not yet. It's dawn to your see. Her name was Clara. I first saw her on a Thursday when the world outside was soaked in gray, the kind of rain that seeps into your bones before it ever touches your skin. The library was quiet, quieter than usual. And I had come not for books, but for silence that didn't echo back my loneliness. She sat across from me at the long oak table by the window. A loose sweater draped over her shoulders, pen tucked behind her ear, and ink stains smudging the side of her hand like she'd wrestled with a thought too heavy for paper. Her book was open, words scattered across the page in unlined freedom. They looked like they had been poured, not written, the kind of sentences born from pain with nowhere else to go. But she didn't glance up. Not until my chair scraped the floor a little too sharply, and her eyes finally met mine. Brown, clear, no judgment. Just the soft recognition of someone who had learned to carry their sadness quietly. She smiled. Not the kind that reaches for your story, the kind that waits for it, like a hand held out without pressure to be taken. I gave her a nod, nothing more. I wasn't ready for anyone, not another conversation, not another person asking, "Are you okay?" Because the truth is, I wasn't. And some questions don't need answers, they need quiet. She gave me that. We sat like that for hours, not speaking, just existing beside each other. Like two strangers who had no desire to fix the silence between them. Her pen scratched across the page with rhythm, and I pretended to read a book I never turned the page of. At one point, her sleeve slipped, and I saw a line of text inked across her wrist in faint blue. Grief, too, is a kind of love. It stopped me. Because I had been trying so hard to erase my pain, but maybe I wasn't supposed to. Maybe it was just love with nowhere to go. The second time we met, it wasn't coincidence. I came earlier, chose the same seat. Waited. She arrived 10 minutes later, coffee in one hand, headphones tangled in the other. Without a word, she sat across from me again. No awkward nod, no forced smile, just a shared understanding that whatever we were, it didn't need a name yet. This time, she offered me a piece of chocolate from her bag. I took it. It melted too fast between my fingers, and she laughed softly when I wiped it on a napkin. It was the first time I'd laughed in weeks, barely audible, but real. We didn't speak until the third day. And even then, it wasn't conversation. It was poetry. "I hate mornings," I said quietly, not sure why. She looked up from her page. "Because they make you start again?" I nodded. She tore a piece of paper from her notebook and slid it across the table. "I like mornings," it read. "They prove the world didn't end even when it felt like it did." My hands trembled as I read it. Not because of the words, but because someone had finally met my grief without trying to erase it. Over the next few weeks, we met in the same spot, same time, same silence, slowly blooming into soft confessions. I told her about the girl who left without closing the door, how I'd been sleeping in half-empty beds and drinking conversations from old mugs, how love had turned into confusion, and confusion into collapse. But I didn't say her name, I never had to. Clara didn't ask, she just listened. And when she did speak, her voice was a whisper, like poetry read under breath. "You don't need to justify how much it hurt," she said once. "That's how you know it was real." She never touched me, not once. But somehow her presence felt more intimate than anyone who ever had. The way she tilted her head when I struggled to speak, the way she underlined her own writing like it deserved to be remembered. The way she breathed in stillness, not out of fear, but out of reverence for pain. She had ink on her fingers and silence in her spine, and both felt like home. One afternoon, I noticed the ink on her wrist was smudged, almost gone. I asked why she didn't tattoo it, why she let it fade. She smiled, tucking the pen behind her ear. "Because grief isn't forever," she said, "but remembering is." That night, I walked home with one of her poems folded in my pocket. The rain had returned, but this time, it felt different. Cleansing, not cruel. I stood under the street lamp, unfolded the paper, and read it again. And again. At the bottom was a note in her handwriting. "You don't owe anyone your healing, just don't hide it from yourself." I looked up, eyes stinging, not from tears, but from weight lifting. And for the first time since she left, I didn't feel like the broken one. I just felt like someone beginning again. It didn't return like a storm. No thunder, no lightning, no cinematic crescendo where I stood in the rain yelling at the sky, reborn. It came in silence. On a warm Thursday afternoon in a small cafe on 12th and Maple, where Clara sat beside me with a book too heavy for her hands, and the light from the window painted gold on the table between us. Her coffee was already cold. She never drank it anyway, she just liked the way it smelled, the way it felt to hold something warm. She was reading aloud softly, barely louder than a breath, and I wasn't listening to the words. I was watching the way her fingers moved, tracing the edge of the paper like she was afraid of damaging the meaning. Then, without looking up, her hand found my arm, not to hold, not to cling, just to be there. Her fingertips moved absent-mindedly, tracing invisible lines on my forearm. It wasn't intimate in the way most people would describe, it was safe. And somewhere in that moment, between the rustle of a turned page and the hum of the espresso machine behind the counter, I noticed something strange. My shoulders weren't heavy anymore. It hit me slowly. Like remembering a song from childhood, but not the lyrics, just the way it used to make you feel. I had grown used to the weight, wore it like a second skin, the pain, the ache, the echo of someone else's goodbye. But it was gone, not violently, not suddenly. Just gone. I shifted in my seat, sat straighter, realized I wasn't curling into myself like I used to. My breath didn't feel shallow. My chest didn't feel like a cage. It felt like air. Simple, soft, and mine again. I turned toward the window. Not for any reason. Maybe just to see if the world had changed while I was busy breaking. And there, in the faint reflection cast against the glass, I saw him. Me, eyes closed, face tilted just slightly toward the sun, and a smile, small, almost invisible, but real, not the smile you fake at weddings, not the one you use when someone says, "You seem quiet lately." This was the kind of smile that didn't need a reason, the kind your body remembers even when your heart forgets. And I realized, I hadn't noticed its return, I hadn't chased it, I didn't force it. It came back on its own. Like a wild animal you stopped trying to tame. Clara looked up just then, caught me staring at the window, at my own reflection. "What is it?" she asked. I blinked, turned to her, shook my head, but laughed, hid under my breath. "Nothing," I whispered. And for once, I didn't feel the need to explain the poetry in my chest. She nodded, like she already understood, like she always did. We didn't talk much after that, not that day. She read. I watched people pass outside, a mother holding a toddler's hand, a man carrying sunflowers, a girl crying behind sunglasses. The world was still messy, still heartbreaking, still stitched together by stories we'll never hear. But for once, it didn't feel like it was falling apart around me, it just existed. And I existed in it, not as a shadow, but as someone slowly stepping back into the light. Later that evening, when we walked outside, the breeze was soft, not cold, not biting. And when Clara wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck, I instinctively offered my jacket. She smiled at me, didn't take it. But the gesture remained suspended between us, like a line drawn gently in pencil, not to be erased, just traced again someday. On the walk home, I found myself humming, a tune I didn't even know I remembered, from a song she and I used to play in the car, the she before Clara, the she who left, but this time, the melody didn't ache, it simply floated, like a leaf caught in wind, beautiful, but no longer something I chased. Healing doesn't scream when it arrives, it doesn't hold a sign or ring a bell. It whispers. In coffee shops, in borrowed books, in ink-stained fingers and smiles you don't realize you're wearing. It happens while you're busy surviving. Then suddenly, you're not just surviving anymore, you're living, quietly, but deeply. That night, before bed, I looked in the mirror again. Same face, same tired eyes. But that smile? Still there. And this time, I smiled back. It didn't happen with thunder, no text, no knock, no long-forgotten voicemail trying to resurrect something we'd buried. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the sky was pale, the kind of white that blurs everything, the clouds, the light, even your sense of time. Clara and I were at the cafe on 4th Street, our cafe. Well, hers and mine now, not ours, the way it used to be with someone else. I hadn't stepped into that place since she left. Too many memories were steeped into the walls, like the smell of burnt espresso and overplayed indie music. But Clara had chosen it randomly, tugging me by the hand, oblivious to the ghosts inside. Maybe that's why it felt safe this time. Because she didn't ask me if it was okay, she just assumed I'd be okay. And strangely, I was. We sat in the corner booth by the window, the same one she and I used to sit in. But this time, my hand was in Clara's. She was telling a story, something about a couple arguing over scones, and her laugh spilled into the space between us, light and unfiltered. It curled around my neck like the scarf I wasn't wearing, like warmth without condition. I didn't realize I was smiling until she looked at me mid-laugh, eyes softening like she'd just caught something private. She didn't say anything, just gave my hand a gentle squeeze, then kept talking. And that's when the bell above the door rang. I didn't look up at first, didn't need to. There's a certain shift in the air when your past walks into your present, a tension, like the universe holding its breath. She walked in. Her. The one who once held my mornings, the one who once made the decision to leave me behind with confusion and silence. She wasn't holding anyone's hand, no coat around her shoulders, just her, and the ghost of something unresolved behind her eyes. She froze when she saw me, like someone walking into a dream only to find it already belonged to someone else. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide, stunned, uncertain. She didn't blink, didn't move, just stood there. And I looked back, not out of anger, not out of heartbreak, but out of curiosity. Because in that moment, I realized. I didn't miss her, not anymore. Clara's hand was still in mine. She didn't notice the tension in my shoulders, or maybe she did and chose to let me process it my way. She kept talking, unaware, or maybe, trusting me to hold that space without crumbling. I met her gaze again, my past, the one who said her heart was confused, but now her confusion looked like regret, like watching a movie you walked out of, only to realize the ending was the part worth staying for. She looked between us, between my smile and Clara's fingers intertwined with mine, between the old version of me she remembered and the new one she hadn't earned the right to meet. And still, she didn't say a word. She just stood there, caught in the middle of a memory that had already healed without her. And I just smiled. Not to hurt her, not to prove a point. Just a simple smile. The kind that says, I made it, without you, without apology, without needing closure. Eventually, she turned, left without ordering. The bell rang again. But this time, it didn't feel like the end of anything. It felt like punctuation, a full stop. Finally, Clara looked at me. What? She asked gently, her thumb brushing my wrist. I shook my head, smiled again. Nothing, just remembering how far I've come. The coffee was cold, but my chest was warm, and somewhere outside, the wind picked up, carrying her silence into the sky where it belonged. She had walked in on an accident. But maybe that's how some people learn what they've lost, not through fights or forgiveness, but through quiet glances at the peace they no longer have access to. She was waiting for me. Outside the cafe, outside my peace, outside the version of me she no longer had the right to call hers. It was dusk, and the air had that amber glow, the kind that softens sharp things and makes even pain look poetic. But there was nothing soft about the way she looked at me. She stood still, arms wrapped around herself, like the world had just taught her how cold it could be when you leave warmth behind. Clara had gone back in to pay for our drinks. I had stepped outside to take a breath, and there she was, my past, in full color, drenched in a sadness I no longer felt responsible for. She stepped forward first. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice almost trembling. I didn't nod, didn't answer. I just let silence speak first. Her eyes shimmered, tears. But not the kind that come from grief, the kind that come when realization cuts deeper than memory. "I didn't know how much you mattered, not until I saw you with her." There it was. Not an apology, not remorse, just a confession, birthed not from love, but from jealousy. Funny how people start to remember your value only when someone else is holding it with care. "I miss us," she whispered. Her voice cracked. She looked at me like I was a home she forgot to lock, and came back to find someone else living inside, but there was no us left to miss. Not in the way she remembered, not in the way she wanted. "I know I left," she continued, voice rising slightly, "but I was confused, I didn't know what I needed, I thought space would help me figure it out." "You didn't need space," I said softly. "You needed someone easier to love." She flinched. Just for a second. But enough. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even cold. Just clear. Clear in the way you become after surviving something that almost convinced you weren't enough. She stepped closer, reached for my hand. But I pulled back, not out of spite, but out of respect for the man I had become in the aftermath of her doubt. "You didn't lose me when you left," I told her gently. "You lost me when you started doubting the love that never did." Her lip trembled. eyes filling again, this time with something closer to shame. I was scared, she whispered, of how much you loved me, of how much it asked of me to love you back that deeply. I nodded. I know, and I gave you space to run, but I was never the thing chasing you. A gust of wind passed between us, lifting a dried leaf off the sidewalk. It floated for a moment, then dropped right between our feet. A quiet symbol of something once alive, now just there, not hurting, not healing, just done. She looked down at it, didn't speak. I looked up, past her, toward the windows where Clara now stood inside, waiting, watching. She didn't move, she didn't interrupt. She trusted me. And that's what love feels like, not performance, but presence. I don't hate you, I said, turning back to her. I just finally forgave myself for waiting so long for you to choose me. Her face fell. She opened her mouth like she wanted to ask for another chance, to rewrite what she'd erased. But some stories are better left in the past, not out of bitterness, but because the ending finally made sense. Clara stepped outside then. She didn't say anything, just slipped her hand into mine like it had always belonged there, and I let it. My past looked at the space between us, then at me, then at the girl who held what she once dropped. She didn't cry, not this time. She just nodded, a silent acceptance that peace had found me, after she didn't. As we walked away, I didn't look back. Some people only find clarity in the rearview mirror of the lives they abandoned, and some smiles, like mine, aren't meant to be shared twice. It was raining again. The kind of slow, rhythmic drizzle that taps against the windows like someone trying to be remembered. I sat by the desk in the corner of my apartment, a mug of lukewarm tea beside me, a pen in my hand, and silence louder than ever in the room. I hadn't written to her since she left, not really, not even in the moments when I wanted to scream across the distance she created, but that night, I finally did, not for closure, not for revenge, but for release. The paper was cream-colored, thick, textured, the kind you use for things that matter, and I wrote slowly, like every word needed to bleed before it could breathe. I don't hate you, I hated how small I let myself become for you, how I learned to whisper my love when it should have been something loud and unashamed. I paused, looked out the window. The street lamps blurred through the rain, a watercolor of past and present merging quietly in the dark. You never asked me to shrink, but you never stopped me either. I wrote about the nights I waited for texts that never came, how I memorized your silences like verses of a prayer I thought would save us. I told her about the versions of me that died quietly while loving her, the hopeful one, the forgiving one, the one who clung to almost, like it meant, always. And then, I wrote about Clara. She never asked for the stories behind my scars, she just kissed them like they didn't need to be justified. I wrote about how she listens without interrupting, how she doesn't flinch when I pause mid-sentence because the memory hurts too much to finish. How she waits, not because she's unsure, but because she believes healing shouldn't be rushed. There was a moment, somewhere in the middle of the second page, where I felt my hands start to tremble. Not from pain, but from peace. It felt unfamiliar, like a jacket I hadn't worn in years, but it fit. You weren't a villain, but you were careless, and I was a man who mistook endurance for love. I could have stopped there, could have folded the letter and moved on. But I didn't. Because there was still one thing left to say. Thank you for leaving. Because if you hadn't, I never would have learned what staying feels like when it's real. I signed it with my name. Just my name. No longing. No bitterness. No plea for her to write back. Then I folded it once, twice. Pressed the crease with the side of my thumb, held it in my hands for a moment longer than necessary, and placed it under my journal, where the first poem I ever wrote for her still lived, yellowed and faded. It felt right, to bury the end where the beginning once bloomed. I didn't send it, not because I didn't mean it, but because some letters aren't meant to be delivered, they're meant to be written, to remind you of who you were, and who you never have to be again. I stood by the window, watched the rain slow down, and whispered goodbye, not to her, but to the version of myself who waited, begged and broke, just to be enough for someone who never learned how to hold love with both hands. Behind me, the door creaked open. Clara, wrapped in one of my sweaters, hair still damp from her shower, she didn't ask what I was doing, she just walked over, rested her head against my shoulder, and said softly, "You okay?" I nodded, because for once, I was. And in the silence that followed, with her hand sliding gently into mine, I knew I had finally said goodbye, not with words, but with peace. Yazsam mandijui. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized what day it had been. Her birthday. The one I used to circle in red on every calendar I owned. The one I used to spend weeks planning for, searching for the perfect gift, rehearsing the perfect words, desperate to make her feel seen. But this year, it passed like any other. No weight in my chest, no phantom ache in my ribs, no compulsion to check if she was celebrating with someone else. Her name no longer burned. It didn't even echo. It simply existed, somewhere far away, like a book I once loved, but no longer needed to reread. That night, Clara and I danced in her living room. Fairy lights strung across the ceiling flickered like stars we'd strung up just for us. The music was uneven, her playlist was always a chaotic mix of old soul and indie pop, but it didn't matter. We danced barefoot on the hardwood floor, tipsy from red wine and the comfort of being known. Not the kind of known that came from history, but from PT. Resense. From being seen without having to explain where the cracks came from. She twirled once, laughing, her hand still clutching mine, and when she landed back against my chest, everything felt still. The room smelled like cinnamon and candle wax. One of her paintings sat half-finished on the easel near the window, blues and golds swirling like something between ocean and fire. "I think it's ugly," she said, catching my glance. "I think it's honest," I replied. She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't need to be beautiful to be real. There was a time I believed love had to hurt. That passion was proven in how much it consumed you, that waiting, aching, questioning, those were the signs it was deep. But standing there, Clara's arms loosely wrapped around my waist, her cheek resting against my collarbone, I felt something quieter than all that noise. I felt peace, uncomplicated, undeniable. She looked up at me with that soft gaze she always wore when I got too quiet. "Where'd you go?" she asked gently. I shook my head, smiled. "Nowhere, I'm exactly where I want to be." And it was the truth, no edits, no hesitation. The song faded into another and I bent down to kiss her forehead. It was simple, bare, but in that one moment, I felt something click into place. Not because I was trying to forget someone else, but because I had finally remembered myself. I was never too much, never too intense, never too emotional or dramatic or overwhelming. I just loved the wrong person loudly, loud enough to drown myself out. Clara didn't need my love to be trimmed or softened. She let it arrive in full, messy, poetic, sometimes clumsy. She didn't flinch when I spoke in metaphors. She didn't ask me to explain every silence. She just held space. And in that space, I bloomed. Later, we sat on the floor, backs against the couch, a half-empty bottle of wine between us. The rain began to tap against the windows again, not heavy, just enough to feel nostalgic. She rested her head on my shoulder, fingers absent-mindedly tracing my hand. Neither of us spoke. There was no need. And that's when I realized. The kind of love I used to beg for. I had it now. But it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it didn't need proving. It was just there. Patient, present, true. Somewhere in the distance, a phone buzzed, not mine, not Clara's, just the world reminding us it still existed. But in that apartment, under flickering fairy lights and laughter still lingering in the corners of the room, I finally understood what peace sounds like. It sounds like nothing trying to escape. She still watches my stories. Not all of them, just the quiet ones. The ones with warm light spilling across Clara's floor, the ones where I'm reading by the window, her head in my lap, my fingers tracing lazy circles on her shoulder. The ones where the caption says nothing but the piece is loud enough to hear through the screen. And I know it stings. Because she always taps the heart of those, sometimes even comments, "Glad you're doing well." But she doesn't mean glad, she means late. And I don't reply, not because I'm cruel, but because peace isn't something you return to the person who shattered it. It's something you protect. Something you cup gently in your palms, the way Clara cups my face when I get too quiet, too still, like I might fall back into the versions of myself I buried just to survive. The last photo she reacted to was a snapshot Clara took of me mid-laugh, unfiltered, eyes half shut, sun lows, eyed catching the corner of my smile. It wasn't staged, it wasn't a performance, it was real. And maybe that's why it hurt her. Because that's the kind of joy she never got from me. Not because I didn't try, but because I was always too busy proving I was worth staying for. She sends no direct messages, only those tiny, distant acknowledgments, a like, a 3-word comment, a digital breadcrumb trail back to a version of me that no longer exists. And sometimes, when the night is soft and my thoughts drift, I wonder what she sees when she looks at me now. Does she see the man who used to wait for her replies? The one who wrote letters he never sent, who folded himself into smaller and smaller shapes, hoping to fit into the hollow space she kept offering as a home? Or does she see the man I became after her? The one who now wakes up beside someone, who doesn't question if love should feel like effort. Sometimes, Clara finds me scrolling, pausing too long on a familiar name. She doesn't ask, she doesn't pry. She just rests her hand on my chest and says, "Come back." And I do, every time. Because my peace lives in the present, not the places I once bled in. There's a photo of Clara asleep in my phone, hair spread across my lap like sun-drenched silk, her breathing deep, her fingers still wrapped around mine even in her dreams. I almost posted it once, but I didn't. Not everything sacred needs to be seen, not everything gentle needs to be proven. Some peace is too soft for display, too sacred for performance. She still lingers though, my past, not in my bed, not in my inbox. But in that strange, flickering space where people finally understand the weight of what they walked away from. And sometimes I imagine her, alone on her balcony, scrolling through her phone at night, eyes catching that one video Clara took of me painting a wall white, my shirt messy, my hair dusted with flecks of sunlight. And in that moment, I think she finally understood, not what I lost, but what she gave away. Because some hearts aren't confused, they're just searching for louder love, faster thrills, easier exits. Until they see what love looks like, when it's quiet, and consistent, and kind. Clara leans over now from across the couch, placing a mug of tea by my elbow. She smiles. And I remember again why I never reply. Because healing isn't a full circle. It's a forward motion. And I am already too far ahead. The sun pours in through the window, spilling across Clara's lap where my head now rests. Her fingers thread through my hair without question. No need to ask if I'm okay. She already knows. She made it so. And somewhere, miles away, behind a screen dimly lit in the dark, someone finally understands that what they called confusion was just the absence of love they never learned how to give.